So, we're continuing now with our series on John. And so this week we're going to be looking at the second sign, which is the story of the healing of the royal official's son. So as I explained in the first session in the introduction, we have 7 main themes that run throughout John, and this is the second one. And as I pointed out, we have 3 areas that link together across the 7. So first of all, we have the sign, and we dealt with water and the wine last week. This week we're looking at the healing of the royal official's son. That's the sign. It seems to be linked with an unspecified feast, but it's most believed that that feast is Pentecost because of the timing of other things that are happening around Jesus at this moment. And then we have the I am, which is associated with it, which is I am the gate or I am the shepherd, which fundamentally is the same thing. And so you may remember that I had these charts that showed how these things come together. So here we have the passage, the healing of the royal official's son. We have the feast, which we believe is Pentecost, and we have I am the gate, the shepherd. And the theme, the message in here is that this thing is not simply for the Jews, but has been extended to the Gentiles. So let's start taking a look at this and why these 3 things are linked together and how they link together. First of all, it says he's a royal official in many versions. The word there that's used, he was a basilikos, which comes from the word basileus, which means king. The most common way that word has been translated into English in most versions is nobleman. But in other versions we have a ruler, we have a king's official, we have even the word sovereign at one point, or the word courtier. So he is either related to the king in some way, or he is a very high royal official. But the most important thing to note about him is he was not a Jew. He is a Gentile. So where has he come from? We see the name Herod appearing all over the place in the New Testament. And in fact, there are 3 Herods that play a principal role throughout the New Testament. The Herod that is during most of the life of Christ is Herod Antipas of Idumea, which is part of Edom. He was also known as Herod Tetrarch, and he was king from 4 BC until AD 39. And he is the king that killed John the Baptist. And so he is the one that is in existence throughout the Gospels and just starting to go into the book of the Acts. And he is responsible for some construction. He actually followed on from his father here. And he was responsible for finishing the building of the temple. He oversaw that final stage, its final completion. He also built the city of Tiberias. And Tiberias is still there today, to this day. It sits on the west coast of Galilee. It's the biggest town around Galilee today. It wasn't in those days. There were other bigger towns. And he actually wasn't very popular for having done that because there used to be a graveyard there, and he built over the top of it, which meant that many Jews wouldn't even go into the city because they believed that it was unclean, that it was sacrilege. Later, it became a center for Jewish teaching and learning. And this is the Herod Antipas, who is mostly mentioned throughout the Gospels. He was the son of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great was king from 37 to 4 BC. And he was the one who ordered the killing of all the babies at the birth of Christ. He is the one who, hearing about this potential person who might challenge his position to the throne, he's the one who wanted to try and stop the arrival of this king of the Jews that he'd heard about from the wise men. Now, he got involved in massive construction projects. What tended to happen was that the Romans, when they took a region, one of the things that they used to like to do is they used to like to take somebody from among the population and make them king. Now, if the king that was there was somebody who was very much compliant with the Romans right from the beginning, didn't resist them, then he would become a vassal king to Rome, and they would just accept him in that role. But usually they had to get rid of that person because he was against Rome and wouldn't comply. And so they would then find somebody that they could make king who would be their mouthpiece, and they would choose a local to do that. In fact, one of the successes of the Romans is that as much as possible, the Roman soldiers and officials within a land, they would try and recruit them locally. So they would actually recruit soldiers locally in the area. And the idea was that fundamentally the people wouldn't be so aggressive against a Roman army that was made up largely of their own people. If they had a ruler over them, even though it was a vassal ruler who again was from their own people, then again the chances are that they would be a little more amenable and less disruptive. In Israel, this didn't work. Nobody would accept the role. The predecessors to the Herodian dynasty, the Maccabees, were in fact regarded in a large way as traitors to Israel. There was infighting between the brothers. It was because of that infighting that brought down, finally, the collapse of Jerusalem and enabled the Romans to enter Rome and sack it. What had actually happened was that the younger Maccabee brother was king in Jerusalem at the time and was very successfully holding a siege position. The Romans had surrounded Jerusalem for years and had failed to break Jerusalem. And a Roman general called Pompey was dispatched to go and take a look by Julius Caesar. And at the time, there were three men who represented the position of emperor. There was Julius Caesar, there was a man called Crassus. Julius Caesar was a seasoned politician. Crassus was an administrator. And Pompey, the third man, was a warrior. And Julius Caesar was very skilled at sort of getting control. And so he'd managed to divert Pompey and sent him off on all kinds of different campaigns. Pompey went into Germany, Pompey went into Spain. He conquered and successfully wherever he went. And even after he'd conquered all of these areas, as he's travelling back, Julius Caesar gave him the job of dealing with pirates in the Mediterranean. And just like today, good news can affect the stock markets. The moment it was announced that Pompey was going to tackle the pirates in the Mediterranean who were disrupting trade badly, the value or the price of basic commodities fell because it was believed Pompey will sort this out. Pompey is the one to make this happen. And so faith in Pompey meant that commodities, which had become very expensive, just came down in price dramatically. But then it's what else do we do with Pompey? The next thing that Pompey was given to do was he was also sent after Spartacus, who was leading this band of slaves, and Pompey also managed to successfully deal with Spartacus. So all these things that Pompey was given to do to try and keep him out of Rome, he just kept winning great successes and was regarded very highly by the people of Rome. Crassus had been kept out of the way for a long time because Crassus, who was the one who had been sent to the Middle East to oversee the siege of Jerusalem, and as I say, this had been very successful, and the fact that Jerusalem wasn't falling actually played into Julius Caesar's hands, because it just meant longer it went on, the longer Crassus was out of his way. But it was also becoming a bit of an embarrassment that a Roman legion was failing to have any success here. And so Pompey was sent to go and help Crassus. Julius Caesar didn't really expect him to have great success at that, but Pompey did what he always did best. He would go to a situation and watch what was happening. And one day he noticed that every week there was a day when everything went quiet. And he inquired about this of the Maccabee brother, the older brother who was actually a cripple, what's going on. And keen to gain this position of king over Israel, he worked with the Romans and explained about the Sabbath day. And so the Sabbath day was then used by Pompey the first week in order to bring all his war machinery up to the walls, and the following week effectively just walked in. So he then did something quite astonishing. He'd heard about this God of Israel, that there was a temple where this God of Israel was. And so he rode down the street on his horse into the temple. He rode right into the inner courts. He went right through the open courtyard, a courtyard where only Jews were supposed to go, and then on into the temple and right on into the Holy of Holies itself, and came out and said, "I see no God." Pompey, up until that moment in his life, had been a very lucky man. Everything he put his hand to, he was successful at. And that was the last day that he was successful. That was the last day he had any luck. He went home to find that his wife had left him. He went home to find that people had taken over his lands, but too strong for him to be able to deal with. Julius Caesar, because he had not been out on any campaigns, had been persuaded by the council to go, and so Caesar went to Gaul. And Caesar was about to come back, and because the Roman council didn't actually want Caesar back, they asked Pompey if he would go and kill Caesar. And so Pompey thought this was a wonderful return of his good luck, that he would be able to go and meet Caesar in battle and defeat him, and then come back, and felt that he was now going to have power in Rome as a Roman Empire without Caesar's interference. And so Pompey, with great confidence, went up to try and meet Caesar in battle. And he sent the messages out for all of the guys that used to form his armies. He arrived and set up a camp at a place where he would be able to encounter Caesar, and nobody came. And of course Caesar arrived, and seeing Pompey camped there with only a handful of men, knew full well why he'd been sent there. And so Caesar pursued him all the way through Europe, all the way down through Italy. Pompey then managed to escape on a ship and fled to Egypt. And in Egypt at the time, there was a young queen called Cleopatra. She was actually Cleopatra the 13th. She was a descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals. This line, this royal line that had ruled over Egypt ever since Alexander the Great, the eldest children were either named Cleopatra or they were named Ptolemy. And so she was Cleopatra the 13th. Her younger brother was Ptolemy the 7th. And she's heard that Pompey is on his way to Egypt. And she has to make a decision. If she allows him to land and gives him refuge, then she risks bringing Rome down against her. But if she sends him away and doesn't accept him, she knew his reputation for being a lucky man. He might become lucky again. Pompey may then side against her and support Ptolemy, her younger brother. And again, she loses the throne. And she felt that she could lose either way, whichever decision she took. And so she arranged for Pompey to actually be put to death on the beach as he landed. And that's what happened. So his luck never returned. He completely failed. And that began at the moment that he rode into the temple. It was then Herod the Great, as I say, who began this big construction project on the Second Temple. He wanted to try and curry favour with the Jews who hated him because he had accepted this role as king. He was a Gentile. He was officially king over the whole of that region. They didn't accept him. And yet he tried very hard to curry favour. He put an enormous amount of effort. The construction of this temple was enormous. Way, way bigger. Way, way more spectacular than Solomon's temple. It was huge. In fact, when I went to Israel, I went down and you can see one of the stones that forms the big wall that goes around the whole site. And this is a single stone which is something like 60 feet long. It's about 40 feet wide and 10 feet high. It is the largest hewn stone, largest known hewn stone in history, and still is the largest single hewn stone in the world today. How they moved it? Not with slave labour. Not with slave labour. The whole thing was built using no slave labour at all. Every single person was paid. They were all paid contractors. He also built a port at Caesarea. He also built Masada, which was a hilltop fortress. He also built a city called Herodium. These were all big, big construction projects, and all designed to appease the people of Israel, but it never worked. Herod the Great is the Herod that is referred to in the Matthew infancy narrative, where all the babies were slain. So, for this current story in the Gospels, it's Herod Antipas, and then after Antipas, after the resurrection and so on, we then have Herod Agrippa I, and this is the Herod that appears throughout most of the book of Acts. And so this is a third generation. Now, he's not a descendant of Antipas. He is a descendant of Aristobulus, who was Herod Antipater's half-brother. So just to explain something, Herod the Great ruled over one big area. But as his reign was coming to an end, the Romans decided that they didn't trust any of the Herodian dynasty individually to continue to take on the role. So what the Romans agreed to do with Herod the Great was to divide the whole of that region into four quarters. And those 4 quarters, each one was ruled by a separate son or daughter of Herod. So there were 3 sons and 1 daughter. And Herod Antipater was one of them, which is why he's called Tetrarch, Herod Tetrarch, because he was ruler of a quarter. And Aristobulus was another one of those who were, he was a descendant of his uncle, who was one of the 4 rulers there. Now it's Herod Agrippa I who killed James, the brother of John. So he's a royal official. He is a basilikos. that is being healed, or the son of whom is being healed by Jesus. And throughout the Bible, one of the phrases for somebody who is a ruler over people is a shepherd. A ruler is a shepherd over his people. And because the Jews hated having Herod as their king, it is very unlikely that there were any Jews who were working for him, any Jews in the palace, any Jews in service to the king. He was hated, but had an enormous amount of money coming in from the Romans to help support him. So the royal official would also have been a Gentile, most likely. So that's the official. The second thing in our little chart is the I am. I am the shepherd. I am the gate. And the reason that these are actually the same thing is if you look here, you could see that there was this way of building a wall for a sheepfold. And it would have an open entrance to it. The shepherd would actually sleep in that gap, in that space, so that he was literally the door as well as being the shepherd. He was both in the same way. And so he controls who and what goes in and out of this sheepfold. Now, all of the I ams, and I had deliberately put them on my chart with capital letters I am, because the very term I am refers to God. So last week we looked at Jesus as I am the true vine, God the true vine. This week, God the shepherd, God the great shepherd, God the gate. The concept of God as a shepherd goes right way back into the Old Testament. In fact, the very first reference to a shepherd, the very first use of the actual word, the direct word, is a verse in Genesis that says, every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. And it's quite interesting that Egypt had been a bit of a thorn in the side to Israel for some time. And there came a point where, through Jeremiah, a prophecy is given against Egypt that says, I shall kindle a fire in the temples of the gods of Egypt. And he, that is Nebuchadnezzar, because there's a prophecy about Nebuchadnezzar attacking Egypt. And he shall burn them and carry them away captive. And he shall clean the land of Egypt as a shepherd cleans his cloak of vermin. You know, this nation that considers every shepherd is an abomination are reaping the penalty of that thinking as the shepherd of Israel, God, the great shepherd of Israel, treats Egypt like a shepherd cleans his cloak of vermin. But you know, the great shepherd is mentioned even earlier. I think we did kind of briefly touch on it, that this goes back again to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. You're not going to get away from it that quickly. That the word Elohim itself actually contains within it mention of a shepherd. In fact, this form of writing in Hebrew is called square form and was a later development. But there was a much more earlier form than that, which was in common use. And it involved little pictograms. And so the Aleph is imaged as an ox head. The Lamed, the second letter, is imaged as a shepherd's crook. The Hay is imaged as a little man praising God. The Yod as an arm with a hand on the end. And Yod means hand. And finally, Mem, wavy line representing water. And that Aleph has no sound to it. It doesn't have a sound. It acquires a sound by adding a vowel to it. And so there's a vowel sound added to this in the word Elohim. That it's not the aleph that is pronounced at eh, it's the vowel sound that's added to it. In fact, there is a pointing that's added to it, which creates that eh sound. But actually, on its own, the aleph has no sound at all. And it's known as the God letter. Has a value of 1 and is known as the God letter. And it has this kind of strong sense. It indicates father. It's the first letter of the word father. But it's the God letter. The second, the shepherd's crook. The third, worship and praise. Usually worship and praise because he is our provider for everything. He is the one. There's nothing we need because he provides everything. And then you've got the arm, the hand, the water. And the amazing thing is that when you look at it, actually this is Psalm 23, verses 1 and 2b. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leads me beside the waters. And I had one of those little moments this week as I was looking at this whole subject. I had one of those moments where you think, wow, God has a message here that's right in Genesis. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He's put it in Psalms. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I mean, the very name Elohim is the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And guess what? It's in Revelation as well. This was my little moment this week. It actually begins with the I shall not want bit. Because first of all, it tells us, he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. So there's shelter. They shall hunger no more. They shall neither thirst. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. So here we have this idea of I shall not want. And then it says, for the Lamb in the midst of the throne, God, will be their shepherd. Lord is my shepherd. And he will guide them to springs of living water. Revelation. It's everywhere. This concept of this God, who is our shepherd, runs right through as a theme throughout the whole Bible. This is who he is. He is the one who rules over us. He is the Lord of the universe. He is our shepherd. In fact, we see it again, this concept of the shepherd, that God is the shepherd, when Jacob is blessing Joseph. And as part of Jacob's blessing for Joseph, he says, his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Needs slight translating. His arms, that's Joseph's arms, were made agile by the hands of God. He is the mighty one of Jacob. And from the hands of God is Jesus, the shepherd, the rock. That's Jacob's blessing for Joseph. Psalm 80 verse 1 we touched on last week when we were looking at the vine, Jesus as the true vine. O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock, you who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth. Clearly this shepherd, God is this shepherd. And then in Isaiah that Pete read this morning, he will lead his flock like a shepherd. This is not talking about God Jehovah in the present, as it were. It's talking about a future event that God will do. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. It's a future promise, something that's going to happen. And so Jesus comes along and gives us an important statement. What was his purpose when he first came onto the earth? Well, his prime purpose when he first came onto the earth was to the Jew. This is in the middle of a story about a woman who has come to him, a Canaanite woman, who has come to him, who has a daughter that is ill, and she asks him for healing for her daughter. And Jesus says, it's not meet that I should give food from a table prepared fundamentally for the Jews to you. And then she comes back with this answer, but even the dogs at the table eat the crumbs. And Jesus is so impressed with her faith that he meets her need at that point. But at that time, the Gentiles were not the people that he came to. And yet, what we're looking at today is the healing of a royal official's son who is a Gentile. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, he has said to this woman. And this sheepfold are the Jews. But he's come in and his message constantly is, you will only be saved if you follow me. Not every sheep in this sheepfold, the Jews, will be saved. Only those who choose to follow Jesus. And then we see much later in John, he says this, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. It's not that the church is the new Israel. It's that the church joins in, is grafted into the true Israel, which is actually Jesus. The true Israel is Jesus. And so the Gentile is grafted in. He joins that and will become one flock. Not every Jew will be saved, because if they refuse to accept Christ, they're just as lost as anybody else in the world. But the promise of God is that he will come and save them, and that's what he's doing right now. He's speaking to them, he's drawing them in. Any who will listen, he draws them in, and he loves them, he's interested in it. There is still a purpose and a work that he has for the Jew today. But you can only do that for a Jew that follows him, follows Jesus. So we've looked at the I am. We have looked at this story of who this royal official possibly is. And then we just need to consider the feasts. The I am message is embedded into a temple dedication event. Quite clearly states temple dedication. And this was a temple constructed by Gentile kings, Gentile shepherds. And this temple, which has been built by Gentiles and handed over as a gift to the Jews, this is the event, this dedication of this thing is where the I am statement, I am the good shepherd, and the shepherd message comes in. But the sign itself is positioned earlier in the book and is closely positioned with this unknown feast, which is most likely, as I say, because of timings, to be Pentecost. And Pentecost was the launch of the Gentile mission. And so the message here, as I'd introduced it, is that these three things that are centered on the second sign, the message here is that this message of Jesus is not just a message for the Jew, but is also a message that is extended to Gentiles. And when he says, I am the shepherd of Israel is God. When he says, I am, he's saying, I'm God. When he says, I am the shepherd, he is doubly stating that he is God. He is the one who has come to save the Jew and the Gentile.